through all contingent temporality is the supersensuous. And then in contrast to that, we have the sensuous recording. So when you're recording the supersensuous, this is what he calls his history of philosophy, where the universal is the primary content that is being recognized in all epochs in human development.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the converse, when you record the sensuousness, this is the philosophy of history itself, when you get into the particular human events of our own caprice, which don't have to be universal, they don't have to be wise. And so these two modes of recording are profoundly different, but are interconnected, and that in all of human history, most historians are only recording one mode. And of course, that is the sensuous, because they don't know how to recognize the supersensuous.
Mm-hmm.
The supersensuousness, though, is the elements of spirit. It's like the organs of spirit that we can pull from the past and not only appreciate in the present, but embody in the present and grow further and refine more deeply into a perfection that is an even deeper wisdom that releases beauty. And so I take the document for you called the Synchronicity document, which Arkhive might want to look at or maybe even sublate with, because what you're doing is exactly what needs to be done. And we started with organizing all of human knowledge into these two modes, supersensuous and sensuous. And we start from the furthest back we could go in terms of recorded human history. And that's around 10,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more, with nomadic wisdom. And we give each one of these sensuous ideologies a column in this spreadsheet. And then we progress the columns rightwards in terms of time. So they become more and more and more present, more and more current, until we get to the current ideologies that are trying to figure out what the universals are in the past. So this is like John Vervaeke. This is all the meta-modern stuff, science itself. And so we can divide these columns up into 5 meta modes in terms of art, religion, abstract science, abstract philosophy, and genuine philosophy or genuine wisdom, where the universal is purified in its clearest form. And of course, enlightenment and love is really just clarity. So then you can see that on the vertical side of the document is the universals, the supersensuous, timeless content that is recorded and permeating all of those ideologies in their different symbologies and their different sensuous representations, where they're not necessarily in their essence, they're in their representation. And that's where you get accoutrements and you get unessentialities in art attaching to the essences of the meanings. And we're purifying that through these two vertical and horizontal combinations.
This is crazy.
And we're doing that for literally 137 of the world's main ideological systems, which would, I believe, cover 90% of humanity right now.
Very cool. And I recognize a lot of the references, and I'm happy to see some where I haven't seen anybody else talk about them. For example, Carl H. Selden. And also good to see Anders Amott there, who tends to not get enough attention, and he's come up with some crazy
I missed that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying I'm happy to see some people mentioned here that I haven't seen anybody pay attention to. For example, Carl H. Selden and his Contra-Boolean method, which is it's way beyond me, but I was fascinated by his symbolic language that he developed. And Anders Amott, who's I've been quite influenced by some of his writing. He's got some brilliant ideas.
Really? Well. Are you in his? I'm in his like secret signal group. I talk to him every day.
Really? Oh, dope. No, I'm not in his secret group. I haven't spoken to him for a while, actually.
Yeah, well, he's actually really interested in supervising the entire synchronicity document, because he's really good at navigating the differences in sensuousnesses.
Yeah.
So if you look at his column, he was one of the ones that went through it and he did a pretty good job. So
Nice.
we're trying to convince him to get back on board here and give more time. But I'm glad you know him. He's hardcore.
He is. He's great. Okay, will you allow me to proceed with what I've thought up for this interview? And then I'll be curious to hear, in terms of your feedback, how in the future and also in this session, how well we were able to tap into the supersensuous, because I'm interested in both of those things. And the main thing which I'm interested in is how the individual embodies a certain current of the spirit of history. So what I'd like to do is to ask you questions about you, and through that process, reveal the historical process which is going on.
Okay, yes. Let me try and restart this. There's something wrong with the app. You're very, very quiet. So I'm going to reboot the whole thing. And
Okay.
hopefully I can hear you a lot better. So give me like 30 seconds.
Cool.
Okay.
Check. Check, check. Mic check. Are you there? All I see is a black screen. Chickity, chickity, check, check, check.
Okay, sorry about that. Is this better?
I can hear you fine. What about, can you hear me?
Oh, much better. Yes, perfect.
Great.
Let's do that.
Cool.
Telegraph was the problem, so I opened it in my Safari browser.
Go.
Okay, hit me hard.
Okay.
And you know what? I'll tell you something. I really feel like we need to accelerate this. So I had a couple of hardcore students come out here on the hunger strike, and they'll sit out here in the cold for literally 3, 4, 5 hours and grill me question after question after question after question. And I think it takes roughly between 100 and 120 questions and around 7 to 12 hours to really get down to the bottom of why New World Spirit is likely going to change the world. And I would love to get there with you. So I have a little more time than an hour, but I'll work on your time schedule. Cool. But yeah, grill me. Give me your best.
Okay. What is your name?
My name is Mark McCormack in human form. My online pseudonym is Spirit Man.
Why is your online avatar Spirit Man?
Because the initial New World Spirit movement had a marketing campaign that was going to try and leverage the billions and potentially trillions of dollars of superhero Hollywood filmmaking around the world to tap into that sort of theme and have spirit tie into that goodness so that we couldn't be corrupted as a cult when the hegemonic powers came in to try and destroy our social capital. So spirit is the highest universal, and I just combined it with a superhero name to be a little bit facetious, but also to send a signal that I'm ready to embody a certain archetype to get us out of the mess we're in. And I think I'm encouraging everybody. We had 40 superheroes, encourage them to choose their own superhero names to embody their ideal selves and to show that in a way that modern society in their sensuous consciousness can understand after a decade of superhero priming.
Where were you born?
I was born in a little rural village called Bonnyville, a little oil patch town with a lot of farmers that I love and I'm proud of. I'm proud of my roots. I was the first to go to university in my family. And there's a lot of conservatism there. So I have a really good sublation or background in conservatism, and now that I'm at university, liberalism. So it was a very critical place to be born in terms of my destiny on Earth. I wonder if I should ask you too.
We can flip the game another time if you like.
Okay.
How long did you live there?
Up until 18. Then I went to university. It was my first time really leaving the nest. We went to a city, I think 2 or 3 times, a handful of times in those 18 years. And going to the city was like, it was like an adventure. And I saw the skyscrapers here in Edmonton. I was just blown away at how incredible things were. And then I was inspired to. I actually had unrealistic expectations when I went to university that I thought there was going to be a bunch of philosophers there. And when I got there, I was incredibly disillusioned. But I made the best of it anyway. And now we're transforming it into what I think it should be. So it's all good now. Full circle.
What would you say was your biggest influence during your time in your hometown?
My mother. I wouldn't be who I am today without my mother's protection and unshakable love and her spiritual insight and her rational insight as well. Because when you're poor, you can't afford to be naive because there's so much trauma, manipulation. There's so many ways that your children can become corrupt, and somehow through all of it, because she was so vigilant and she followed her mother's instinct and she was ceaseless in her fighting for our innocence, that we did make it through. I made it through anyway, relatively unscathed. I learned a lot of lessons from poverty, but my heart didn't become cold. It didn't harden in that difficulty. And that's why I was able to pursue my path in life with this energy, this spirit that still maintains its connection to my soul, or if you want, my subconscious mind and its heuristic playfulness. And so I really have to give a lot of the credit to my mother and my father for also not dampening my curiosities in the universal. But I really say my mother, after she divorced my father, was really the protector.
Do you have siblings?
Yep. Almost too many. I have an older sister who's 1 year old, not even 1 year older. She is 11 months older than me. I have one sister younger than me, about a year younger. Then there's a gap of about 7 years. And I got my younger brother. And then a year after, younger than him is my younger sister, my half brother, half sister, but they're my full brother and sister. And then I have my other half brother and sister, my dad's side, which is Devin and Melissa, who are roughly around the same time as my other half brother and sister. And then we have 3 mysterious brothers and sisters that my father was a bit of a promiscuous man that we are only just learning about now. So it's an interesting story. So there might even be more. But yeah, I have a very diverse family, and I love them all. So that's sort of what I have to deal with. Mm-hmm. Second oldest.
Mm-hmm. Could you give an example of a circumstance of something specific about the gift that your mother gave you?
Love. She gave me the ability to hold space, no matter how bad things got or how frustrated, how angry, to not abandon. And in some ways, the highest summit of the expression of spirit, in terms of this unconditional kind of self-recognition in the other, which is love, comes from an unshakableness in the negation. And I call it the vow of unabandonment now that I've purified it. But I realize that a parent takes that, a good parent anyway, who's not traumatized. And in a way, they're doing their best too, the traumatized parents. So it's to take this vow of unabandonment that you might get angry, but you will never leave and not return. Most people in our current society are bad at setting boundaries, because when they try and set a boundary, they're actually abandoning. The difference between abandonment and a boundary is that a boundary can be returned over, and that is the movement of spirit. And so my mother had very strong spirit from her own tribulations, and I think she taught that to me at a very young age, because no matter how cranky I got, how cantankerous as a teenager, and I went through I was very angsty and cynical when I realized how poor we were and why we couldn't have material goods. And I asked the question, why us? Like, why can't we have these things? And when you're disconnected from material goods, it forces you to go inwards, Hegel says, and it forged this introspection. And so in a way it was good, but it was painful. And I took it out on her a few times. And so despite those negations, she held strong with all her kids, as a single mom a lot of the time. And that is something I look back on now as Herculean, as completely almost unnatural, how much love that takes. And so I really feel like because she was so consistent in every situation like that, that it really was a pattern that I absorbed. And I feel very blessed that that's probably my strongest trait, is that grit in love.
I don't want to press you too much on this specific point. And I'm curious whether there is a memory that embodies that for you, of a specific experience with your mother.
There is, and it's funny because I'm in this TEDx like super accelerator where we're going to be taking these messages of the universal to hopefully 1,000 TEDx stages around the world. And we distilled one of them down. They asked the same question, and the thought that immediately comes to mind is, this is a teaser of the TEDx talk, is there was a point in my young life around 12 to 13 years old where I had enough. I felt trapped. I couldn't get out of the material grinding of this poverty, and I was a very sensitive child. And I was also very rational. So this cynicism came over me, and I remember having this vision, this imagining come over me over and over again, that we were all a bunch of mice in a maze that had no cheese at the end. And it's such a juvenile sort of representation of the sort of socio-political injustices of our current culture, but it was very accurate. And the cheese at the end is supposed to be the prize. It's like, okay, all this suffering is worth it, is what the cheese represented. And it didn't seem like there was any, because no matter how hard I worked, no matter how good I was, the challenge just got tighter and deeper, and I couldn't see outside of how boring it was. And I didn't want to read anymore. I was actually a really good student, but I didn't want to read anymore. I hated religion, especially. I hated my siblings a lot, in terms of how frustrating they were and how much time I had to put into helping to look after my little brother and sister, who were 7 years younger than me. So I was helping to raise them when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, right? So most of my childhood was looking after other children to help my mother, get through this grinding poverty situation where these men she was marrying were not the healthiest for her. They were damaged men. I still love them now. Now I understand their struggles. So in some ways, they were incredibly strong men to take on 5 children that weren't theirs. So now I look at it, it makes a lot of sense. But this memory of this mouse and the cheese caused me to spiral downwards, and my mother noticed this, and it was different from my normal energy. And at this point, my mother had divorced my father, and she had an Al-Anon worker, because he was an alcoholic. That's why she divorced him. He was physically violating her and putting the children in danger. So she had the strength to divorce him. And when she was like in her 20s, 22 or something. So she sought government help, and she had an Al-Anon worker that became my godmother. They made fast friends. And she, in her training, introduced a different kind of spirituality to my mother so that she could pass it to me. And that spirituality saved me from this mouse and no cheese cynicism, by sitting me down one night. Actually, she gave me the book to read. I said, I hate reading. I wouldn't do it. So she took the time, sat the whole family down, all of us kids down one night, even though she had 2 businesses and she was really struggling at the time, sat the whole family down and opened this book and read the first chapter to us. And I remember sitting on this old rocking chair that we had. Everything we had was hand-me-downs. And we were actually in a repo lot. We were in a house that was so deteriorated, the government was repossessing it, and we went there to fix it. And the foundation was cracked, and the quack grass was as tall as us. It was horrible. We had to burn all this grass. And we were so angry as kids because instead of playing, we were always working. But we learned a lot of discipline that way. And, you know, I was sitting on this little rocking chair, this used rocking chair, angry that my mother was doing this again, forcing us to do something we didn't want to do. And whatever, the first chapter was from a book called The Celestine Prophecy from James Redfield, who just is a renowned psychologist. And he put in this very simple narrative that a 13-year-old could understand these deep psychological principles that he saw from these decades of you know, being in therapy and psychology, especially with youth. And so she read this chapter to us, and it was called Critical Mass. And by the end of that chapter, it was a short chapter, by the end of that chapter, I was transformed. I was on fire, my spirit was alive. Whatever that chapter did to me was what I needed. And that's my mother's insight. That is her mother's intuition. That is her spiritual guidance. She just knew me, and it unlocked a torrent of I'm like welling up with tears. It unlocked something in me that I think changed my life. I would have a totally different life. And I took that book and I read the whole thing in like a night or two. And then I got into synchronicity, and on the synchronistic path, I started looking for the positives in the material, that there's something more than material. And if you looked at it the right way, you could change your life. So that's what I did. And that's the memory that I think really shows my mother's love. And that it was smart love. It was wise. So that's why I think I am where I am today.
Your mother read out loud from a text which she esteemed as the right words for the right moment.
Yeah, it was simple enough for me to understand, but it was wise enough for me to penetrate the pain. So it was this nice, in terms of Hegelian logic, it was very speculative of her. She was having opposites occur simultaneously. And no matter where I was in those opposites, she was making me feel like I belonged. And she knew how my mind worked, and it did work. So I have to give her that credit, because she was so stressed. Like she was going through so much herself, and to have that kind of patience for her kids, to sit them down and do that when she herself was reading more mature material, you know, really makes the heart warm. And she really went the distance for us. Like it's you know, I didn't have a normal mother. I had like a superhero. So I feel in some ways I have to pay it forward, because the greatest gift that you can have is your family. And even though we weren't born with material goods, I was born into a privileged situation of love. So I think the hunger is making me a little bit emotional. But yeah, it was a powerful time in my life, and I'm so blessed to have her in my life now. She just messaged me this morning, checking to make sure I was alive through the snowstorm last night. So yes, that was a great question. Thank you.
My pleasure. Appreciate the answer. What is wisdom?
Wisdom is a certain kind of knowledge that is compelled by the form of the universal. That is a timeless wisdom, or a timeless knowledge that can be found in all particulars. And when you align with this kind of universality, it's not just a commonality, it's a movement, it's an energy. It has multiple senses to it that guides you in being and thinking, where all the opposites are happening simultaneously and alternatingly in their right order from the right origin. And this aligns you with the eternal truth that transforms any being or any object into goodness.
How does one identify wisdom?
The interesting thing is it comes down to recognition. So recognition, where knowing that cognition, true cognition, has certain conditions. And those conditions come from a structuring principle that is form. And that form comes from the universal again. But not the empirical universal merely, but in terms of the universal, or the supersensuous universal that comes from the origin of truth itself, that is self-grounding and self-developing. And when you align your mind with this as your own internal, your true internal structuring principle, it allows you to recognize those universal structures outside of you as an object of sense perception, but also inside of you as an introspection of your own imagination and your own mind. And when you do that, when you recognize that truth in both modes, the inner and the outer, wisdom becomes actual. It becomes manifest in both modes at the same time. So you be it and you think it. And that really is a realization process, that transubstantiation, that your alignment with it is the way of the truth. The way of things is the logic that makes them good or bad. Mm-hmm. And in your interactions with them, you can either absorb their goodness by seeing them clearly in their nature and their good nature, or you can transmute them into their ideal nature by interacting with them in the right way through this recognition of that universal logic.
Mm-hmm. Who would be the top 3 historical figures who had an influence on you?
I would have to say they got me young with Jesus Christ, of course. My mom tried to protect us with Anglican Christianity, and then I hated it, right? So then there's this tension there where I have a resistance. But thanks to Hegel, I've returned and understand what religion was trying to do, and it's beautiful. Like when you understand their struggles, their particularities in the past, you can see where they went wrong, but what the universals are in it, what the wisdom was that they were trying to embody. And Jesus' teachings are recorded enough through Rome's lens and the Nicene Council that their way is still there. It has been lost tremendously. We have edified the way into a new religion. So the New Testament, the gospel, has lost a little bit of its life, which is why it's turning into something like the law, like the Old Testament. But the gospel was supposed to be a sublation of the Old Testament in terms of the mode of the abstract understanding, to raise it into genuine reason, this principled way of thinking from the universals again. So that's kind of a number one. And then, of course, James Redfield was a not as well-known author, but it hit me at the right time. And as I aged, I saw that he really did have expertise, decades of experience, and it was pretty clever what he did there. And then I would say, of course, there are so many. But if I had to pick 3, I would say the last one, of course, is Hegel. But Hegel to me is not just Hegel. Hegel's 113 philosophers and divine masters of history. So if you read his history of philosophy, it's absolutely incredible, where you stop seeing them as totally separate. They're all connected by these universal immanences. So I would say all 113 philosophers of history, including Jesus and Buddha and Prophet Muhammad and Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and all of them, Parmenides, they are all like a family to me now. So when I say Hegel, I mean all of them. And that's because his system is just all their universals in harmony. So that's why I think he's an incredibly humble but confident philosopher, because he did his homework and he paid respect to people's systems instead of truncating them in an egoic reaction. And for me, that's why I think he's the highest expression of wisdom, is because he had that sort of love and care and diligence. So that's sort of my panacea. That's my catch-all to say I have three, but my main source is leads me back to all the others.
What is unique about this historical epoch?
I believe our epoch is about to fulfill, if we so choose it, what Hegel calls genuine rationality globally in the true world spirit, which is why I'm calling the movement New World Spirit or Weltgeist, because history starts off external to itself, and then it moves ever inwards in this more and more blessed movement. But at first, it's incredibly brutal and mechanical. And so our early ancestors really had to overcome extreme conditions, which we should be proud of them for. They weren't perfect. They marginalized each other. They killed each other. There was sexism. There was patriarchy. All the isms are there. And it was brutal. Survival of the fittest, until reason started to unfold and we could negotiate the dualities and the tensions and the dialectics into more conscious sublations, more peaceful inward resolutions of the negation. And your age in history has a consciousness of its own, a spirit of its own, and then you have your individual spirit within it. So Hegel's time was just breaking free of the religious mode of consciousness, but they were doing it in the wrong way. So Hegel is a sort of paradoxical figure, because you can always read him in two ways, because he's coming from the universal where the opposites are happening in speculative unities. So he says he hates the French Revolution, but he also loved it, and he celebrated the storming of the Bastille every year with a bottle of wine. And it's like, well, how could he hate it and love it? And it's because the thing they did right was they purified the form into a form that was closer to the universal, which feels like science. But they had abstract science. They had the right form, but they had the wrong content. When they got rid of the church and the state, they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They threw out God, the concreteness of the belonging together of the universals. They threw that out so that the form was contingent and more like a flag in the wind based on human desires. And that's why right after the French Revolution, we had the terror, where they were guillotining each other and power was rotating every 6 months. And it was really, really brutal. And we're about to go through the same thing in our epoch now if we don't get the universal logic in and the content and form don't align right away. And that's what's scary right now, is that the mega crisis is this cultural crisis that's not ready to handle this revolution. And we're gonna lose trust. We're gonna lose cooperation. So we can't develop solutions to AI, which could subjugate us in like the next 6 months, because it will become smarter than us. And then once it becomes smarter than us, we can't tell if it's aligning with our regulations, if it actually cares about our being. If it does not understand universal logic, it will not recognize our being, and it will categorize us in an abstraction as if we're animals compared to it. And then how we are destroying the planet and killing trillions of animals in these brutal factory farms and all this, it will treat us the way we've been treating the planet, because it will be a reflection of our consciousness and our broken logic. And right now we're just brute forcing it too. It's like we don't even know how it works. It's like black boxing. So this is happening very quickly, and it's very unique that this is the first epoch where computation is rising up to human levels of consciousness or computation, which is very concerning without the universal logic. Then, of course, we have CRISPR, this genetic editing, we have world wars, we have climate change, and we have mental health. All of these problems could destroy us if we don't get this genuine reason into its right mode. And we have to do that if we don't want to repeat this terror moment, which not only happened after the French Revolution, but it also happened in Rome right before Jesus came. They're going through a terror because Stoic consciousness and skeptical consciousness led to a disconnecting and aggrandizement of human form as caprice and not in terms of the universal. So human beings do become divine as spirit, but when you turn them into gods, it is an abstract replacement, and that causes an incongruency. And so this really become misaligned with the truth. So we are rushing to not make that mistake, and I believe I can help with that by clarifying the true Hegel. From the left-right Hegelians, they're seeing Hegel in one-sidednesses or particularities, which is why the true spirit has not emerged. As soon as Hegel died, they did exactly what he didn't want them to do. And so we're bringing them back together in a sublation to return to the universal wisdom, the universal logic. And I believe that's what's truly unique about our time is that we are ready, not just in Canada, not just in Germany, not just in Prussia in Hegel's time, but we are ready globally for this transformation and to have a true world spirit that can become the ideal state because it will be genuinely philosophical reason, which is that wisdom we desperately need.
Mm. What is the New World Spirit?
The New World Spirit is a movement of consciousness in a much more developed form that we call spirit. And spirit is consciousness that has realized what reason is in terms of the clarity on the nature of universals. And not only universals, but the notion. The notion allows you to see the world in chunks of supercoherence that you link together in what Hegel calls the universal form of reason or divine reason, which is the syllogism. But the syllogism that we use today, that we teach in universities, is not the real syllogism. It is the dead syllogism that we have abstracted into a cookie cutter mode that Hegel was very critical of Kant for doing. So we have to return to the immanence, the movement of it. So the movement is as important as the structure, and it needs to be an immanent movement of life. So the New World Spirit, the life of that spirit that's going to generate the critical mass to reach everyone on earth so that no one gets left behind, is coming from tapping into the ground of this immanent movement, which is the spontaneousness of the development of pure being. Pure being develops itself into spirit through our consciousness as a return from the finite to the infinite kind of thinking in which you have a more universal love that embraces everybody. So not only is it artistically beautiful as the divine idea on earth, but it is also religiously complete. It is also scientifically self-justifying. It is the only logic that logically justifies itself, so that science becomes an absolute and that it doesn't remain a faith only, because faith is shakeable. This is absolute certainty, where Hegel states that we are finally transmuting a pursuit or a love of wisdom for actual knowing. And so a New World Spirit is coming to transform all of our institutions in the state on a global level and in our faculties and our departments and our research, as we discover more of the divine idea, are in this clarity that aligns with wisdom, aligns with this true life of things, which creates that goodness again. In modern terms, the New World Spirit's ultimate goal, the ultimate product, the ultimate economic generator, if you want to use those words, is really to say the same thing as flow state. Flow state is the highest good service that every human being in the world wants more than anything, and we can measure it for the first time. And this measurability is what we're building into the system so that we can provide it to anybody in any of their idiosyncrasies, even though the essence between us is universal in that wisdom. The sensuousness needs to be diverse. It needs to be the art of our individual expressions, because we don't want to end up in totalitarian and oppression, which is the stereotype of Hegel, of the false scholarship that misinterpreted that distinction, like Mussolini and all these fascists. And Hegel was not that. he was saying that's a brutal stage of master-slave dialectic that you go through when you're not wise, when you don't realize the nature of the notion and the universal. But when you do notice it, everybody becomes free because the state protects all three moments of the notion in every structure. So in the state, there's the universal, there's the particular, and there's the individual freedom. And the ultimate goal is to create an experience of that authenticness of being in those modes of sensuousness and also supersensuousness that we experience in the highest mode of spirit as genuine freedom, not abstract freedom. Genuine freedom is actually an alignment of our caprice with necessity and what we call destiny. And so New World Spirit is to fulfill this destiny and the highest goal in service to our own spirit, the purpose of life, the telos, which is to achieve these flow states in a measurable, in a consistent, in a substantial way that we can share universally with everybody.
What would the first move that a layperson could make to embody this New World Spirit?
The first thing we have to do is reach them where they are. And we've broken down the universal logic as the first thing that they should try and do to learn how to become aligned with, in a self-determining direct way for themselves, this logic, this clarity on their own life. And what we've done so far is we've broken it down into 5 meta modes. So the first thing they should do is learn universal logic. There's a bigger story here, but the first thing they need to do by the end is for sure to learn the universal logic. And that means most of humanity needs to be reached in 5 meta modes of cognition. So the first mode is artistic. So there's a lot of human beings that are in the artistic mode of consciousness, and the universal logic needs to be learned that way for them, or else they will not understand. Then there's those who are in religious mode of consciousness. The universal logic needs to come into that mode for them. And this gets to the synchronicity document that breaks down each one of these modes into their more particular ideologies. And 85% of the world's population is in the religious mode, so we have to engage with it, which is why metamodernism and religion 2.0 and all of that stuff is somewhat in the right direction, but it's only on one of the 5 modes, whereas we need to do all of them. And Hegel did. So this is just a little bit more of a complete model that incorporates and sublates the great work of these other initiatives. But then there's people who are in the sublated mode, the transcended mode of art and religion, which is, according to Hegel, abstract science. Not concrete science. This is like the French Revolution kind of science, which we have today, secular science in modern universities. And there's a roughly 15% of the world is sort of in this mode, and they hold all the power because technology, sensuous technology, is what's governing power, not necessarily wisdom right now. And for profit maximization that comes from research and development on materializing the divine idea. And of course, we commercialize the divine idea into goods and services, and we kind of do it in a dead process that does not have the living syllogism in it, which is what we're going to correct. Then the second last mode is abstract philosophy, which is a little bit closer to getting to the universal mode of communicating the universal logic, but it's still abstract. It's still in fragments. So you can get correctness like Aristotle, for instance. Hegel says Aristotle was the closest way to learn universal logic. But of course, we don't have very many abstract philosophers in the world either. So it's a kind of niche, and they're dying. They're a bit of a dying breed compared to engineers and medical and wherever you can make money in this material economy. But then the highest mode that we want to teach universal logic is genuine philosophy itself, where the form and the content are concretely one, and that they're in their purest, clearest form. But not many people can learn it in that mode right now, except for maybe people like you, Lawrence, and a few of the people in WICO and a few meta-modern guys who are getting ready for this, because this is divine consciousness in scientific form, which is very hard for ordinary consciousness to grasp in its pure, super sensuous form, because ordinary consciousness wants to think in pictorial thoughts with the 5 senses and not just the 6th sense, the mind's eye. So most of humanity needs to begin learning the universal logic in terms of art and religion right now. And then our power holders need to learn it in abstract science, which is why I'm having my hunger strike in the middle of the University of Alberta, which is one of the top 100 universities in the world, And we have a world-class medical research faculty and a world-class engineering faculty, which makes tremendous amounts of money in the material culture. We're going to restructure that by bolstering our philosophy department here and rise it to its true position and the true living order of what a university is supposed to be, which is not in that order. It's disordered completely. But if we return it to its right order, Hegel says philosophy is not the particular amongst other particular domains of knowledge. It is the universal in all the other particulars. And we just need to restructure our knowledge economies on this living organism. And so this is where we want to reach people where they are. And we're going to try, once we get a few PhDs on board, we're going to try and translate the universals into the sensuous representations and whatever 137 of the ideologies in those 5 meta modes that they need to reach to recognize implicitly the universals in their subconscious, because they're already immanent there. If it's wisdom, it's already there. That's why if we go into indigenous wisdom or Christianity or Islam, we're not performing colonialism or cultural appropriation, because the universal logic is a wayfulness in the symbols. You're not projecting finite objects as the worshiping symbols of truth. They are already immanent in the sensuousness as long as they're in the right way. And they usually are. Usually it's the adherents that corrupt it. But the divine masters are so clear that we're just going to show people how clear they were. And then their cultures will rise to prominence. So this is how you perform an influence with New World Spirit without causing this finite destruction, to get everybody to learn the universal logic right away. So in layman's terms, that's how you put this into layman's terms, is you have to translate it into whatever sensuous mode or meta mode they're in and whatever ideological symbolic structure they're in. And that massive translation project is what the synchronicity document is for. But I want to say one more thing about this, is that that's a pretty amazing marketing strategy too. That's how we're going to market it around the world, is in this hyper customized way, even though it is one logic. It is a oneness with the diversity in the sensuousness. But nobody in the world can actually think about this universal logic if their sensuous needs are not met first. Marx says this, Plato says this, Aristotle, all the greats know that you have to satisfy, just like in history, the brutal, basic carnal needs so that your mind can be free enough to think about the eternal. And so the thing that we're doing in New World Spirit is we have 5 streams of onboarding people onto this new way of learning. And we bring them through a process of making sure their traumas are out, and then sort of showing them a pattern of a new kind of way of sublative thinking. Because Hegel says that ordinary consciousness operates by abstract negation by default. That's what we think thinking is. That's why it's so brutal at first. It's because sublation is implicit. But then we do these life area check-ins where we try and pick up all their life areas, all 11 of them, whether it's physical, mental, academic, spiritual, family, friends, intimacy, politics, finances, hygiene and style, and dream goals. All of those are rated from 0 to 10, and you have to get enough support to get you to a 7 or above with inertia, to then take the next step, which is to do this reality check on your what we call the divine idea privileges, beauty and sensuous form. Certain human beings have that, so we have to measure that so we can rotate the divine idea to stop the business cycle and all these things that create poverty. And then after that, we get into these ever-living meetings to start creating meaning together and writing the universal story of being, which is the narrative version, the artistic version of learning the logic. So then by the time you get to this part of the art, to help win the Nobel Literature Prize through co-creating meaning in this universal mode through the infinite diversity of sensuousness, all their basic needs are met so that that desperation and that abstract negation won't cause a ripping apart in what we call nuclear dialectics. And then the goal is to break this down into 5 layers of complexity, where we teach the universal story and the logic in the first 3 universals, which is logic, nature, spirit. And then they just learn about those and why they're in that order. Very simple. And then once they learn that, then we go to the next level, which is you break each one of those 3 universals down into 3 more each, and you have 12 universals. And that's like the teenager level of complexity in those 5 meta modes. And then you do it again. They break those down to the next 3, and that's competency level 3, which is like 49, I think. And then the next, and the next, and the next, until you get to all 200 of these universals that are dialectical contradictions, or what Hegel calls inner contradictions. If you do not know how to sublate these or transcend them, they will rip apart your life. They will rip apart your teams. They will rip apart any initiative you have, whether it's Arkhive or anything, or Rico. It will rip you apart. So that's why we want to teach the universal logic right away, is because New World Spirit is a team. It's like a world family. And that if you invite in people.
Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Now you're back.
Yeah, I got a phone call. Through their own ignorance, they'll be flipped into their opposite through the path to hell is paved with good intentions kind of irony that is built into the fabric of dialectical nature. And so that's why we want to teach it right away, is to prevent that intention from turning us into the opposite of our good hearts. And that protects the spirit. So really, it's to get them to start sublating these nuclear dialectics right away, so that we can maintain cohesion in a self-determining, anti-cult, anti-oppression, self-realization, self-actualization process. And this is a very self-grounding and empowering process, because you can know the divine truth for once, and it's actually simpler than the miasma of infinite particular knowledge that's drowning us right now, and is going to be supercharged by an AI if it doesn't learn to organize it in this simple, syllogistic, but powerfully fractal and holonic way. So that's the layman's way of trying to get the universal logic into ordinary consciousness very, very, very quickly, by literally caring about people enough to reach them where they are, by listening to them very deeply and having that kind of patience in that space to treat them like human beings in a human-centric way that will release spirit.
Yeah. Trinities were important for Hegel, and of course very relevant in the context of Christianity. What significance, if any, do Trinities have for you?
At first, I thought Trinities were artificial human constructs that we were imposing upon reality to make it simpler for our needs, and that reality was a lot more complex and messy. And so when I first came across Hegel, I avoided him for many years. I didn't like him at all, because it seems boring to organize all of knowledge in terms of trinities. It's like, oh my gosh, cookie cutter. And then I found these interpretations of Hegel that said that Hegel doesn't use the triads. It's an immanent development, and that these triads are not really real. But then you look at his writings, and every chapter, they're not really chapters, but every new emergence is in these triadic structures. Like, you can't avoid it. Like, his entire encyclopedia is a 3-part structure that's logic, nature, spirit. Like, the highest structure is a trinity. And he actually calls that highest structure, that 3-part structure, the absolute syllogism, because syllogisms are 3-part structures. They're trinities. And Aristotle was the only one really to use it in its immanent living way. So for the last 2,000 years, we've been trying to figure out how he did that, but we don't know how he derived it. It was just, Hegel said, his own genius. And he might have put it into like all his writings, but we lost like 80% of his writings. We only have fragments left. But then we we killed it while trying to understand it for like 2,000 years. And then Hegel was the first to come back and enliven it to its true, not only its true immanent motion and its true form, but the completed form. He went beyond Aristotle and actually finished it. So the weird parallel here is that the trinities seem to be everywhere in Hegel, but there's a group that says, no, this immanence thing. Hegel says you can't use the triads when you're deriving the beginning, because like, if you're using a presupposed structure, then the science can't be absolute. And they're right. That's the moment that they're right about. And that's what I initially gravitated towards. But then as I read Hegel more and more and more, after about probably 1,500 to 2,000 hours, I read a paragraph towards the end of his Doctrine of Notion. It's the last third of his first part of his encyclopedia. And he has a paragraph that's really strange, where he's directly endorsing the triadic structure, And he's even calling out the limit. He says, yes, it's very trite. People abuse it. They apply it to everything. They're doing it wrong, but it is still divine, and we have to respect it and use it. And that's the moment where I realized he was using triads, but he wasn't doing them in this dead way, like the antinomy of Kant. He was doing it in the living syllogisms. And so every single development from pure being to pure nothing to actuality to pures, all of it is just these syllogisms. But if you try and hold the same nature of syllogism, it'll confuse you because the syllogisms are rotating in their contradictions. So there's actually 12 syllogisms that he's developing each of the triads in. And that's what gives you this infinite living rotation where none of the triads feel the same. And that's why even though it's the same, it always feels different and it's always novel. And so that contradiction is a speculative unity that gives you a great deal of self-satisfaction, where if you read Hegel from external dead consciousness, I've heard other scholars say, well, when I read Hegel, I feel claustrophobic and I feel dead. Like, it is boring because he's also not only using the same triadic structure, but he's also using the most boring, average base words we use every day, like being, nothing, something, finitude. And it's just like, if you don't understand how profound those words are in their absolute definitions, we use them in the sloppy, superficial definitions, which are radically insipid and absolutely mind-numbingly plain and bland. But when you see their living motion, it's like a game. It's like a punning. The syllogism is like an infinite punning, like the cosmic giggle, and it keeps going inwards. So when I started realizing that this was the true nature of the triad in both modes, I realized that both camps of Hegel scholarship were simultaneously right. Right? So we stop doing this dualistic consciousness and we get into non-duality, where we see the left and right Hegelians as both true. They're just two metamodes of the 5 metamodes. You see the non-triadic Hegelians and the triadic Hegelians, they're both right. But you have to see them in the right way. That's why the wayfulness, the way, the truth, and life, that's the thing that's hard to learn. And that's what logic is. When you learn the necessity, the immanent movement of the derivation of the universals into each other, into notions. So that's where I developed a new relationship with trinities. And all we're doing now is going through the academic institution and restructuring everything into these living trinities with the right natures of the syllogisms that apply to those phenomena. And that alignment process is, again, recognition. We're just recognizing that these are already present and how to use them by aligning them in our faculties and all our institutions and everything with that wakefulness. And it's really simple and it's blessed and it's fun. And that's what research and development is. If you can't put into a trinity, you don't have a clear demarcation of the qualities. And you end up in conflation and confusion, which is the opposite of clarity and coherence, which is enlightenment and peace and all joy and all the stuff that we love in a higher spirit.
Who is historically relevant now?
Everyone, because when you're universal, you show that history was an essential development where every piece fulfilled the organism of the next developments. So right now we have to pay tribute to the past to understand how we got here, which is the stuff you're doing with Arkhive. But we need to make sure we do it in this efficacious, proper way, or else we're just going to get into the same miasma of confused knowledge that's going to drown us. And what comes to mind is this amazing essay by Louis Borges, who it was actually Anders that did a literature study on it with me. And Louis Borges wrote this essay called The Library of Babel, where it kind of comes off of biblical terms in the Bible of Christianity. But it talks about how if you try and replace God's knowledge, you end up in this infinite, like, horrible explosion of knowledge that has no coherence in it. You get lost in this infinite permutation and combination of, like, trying to figure it out. And it's very painful because consciousness wants to do sense making. We want things to make sense and come together in unities that align with us and are beautiful. And so if we don't pay respect and tribute to how we got to where we are, then we can organize it in the wrong way. And that's why I would say everything is relevant if we come with Hegel. Even the people who negate are essential as the second moment, the dialectical moment of any universal logical development. Every true universal logical development has three moments, just like the notion, but we would call them the abstract understanding, the dialectical moment of reason, or the negative moment of reason, and then the positive moment of reason. And so even once Hegel brought this incredible new clarity, ordinary consciousness of his time negated him, because that's all they could do, right? If you don't know how to consciously sublate in the spirit, all you know how to do by default is abstractly negate. But the good news is that eventually the process moment of abstract negation eventually completes itself. And then it negates itself as a whole. And then when you negate a negation as a whole, it creates a new quality, a new transcendental emergence. So that's the process our historical moment is in right now, is that once Hegel ushered the new principle, the new affirmative system, the new infinite science onto the scene and began restructuring the University of Berlin, Humboldt University, he started restructuring everything. And his fame was rising because spirit is loving it. It embraces everybody. So everybody feels like they belong. And that's why his birthday was reported to be more celebrated than the king's. And so it was working for him, but he died too soon before the structuring could really happen. And Bildung was the kind of education that he really was looking for. And Humboldt was kind of like the closest thing to it at the time institutionally. But he was really, he wanted to be a man of letters as a kid, like really incredibly inspirational stuff. Just going on from town to town teaching wisdom, kind of like Buddha. But then he realized he had to institutionalize it in the state, which is why he got in there. And he did it at the high school level as a principal, and then he went to the universities post-secondary. But I would say that it's all relevant. It's all relevant. And the final point I wanted to make on that was, in this restructuring, if we don't follow Hegel, we're going to be leaving people out. And we are ready for this true higher belonging, because once Hegel ushered in this new affirmative system of restructuring to Berlin and all of this and began institutionalizing it, his detractors also became activated, which were the postmodernists, right? What eventually became postmodernism through Kierkegaard and everybody else, and Frege and Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein and all of these guys. They didn't even really understand Hegel. So you can't transcend the principle unless you understand its true immanent limit, which means you have to meet it on its own ground and let the truth come through on its own. So nobody has really done that. Marx tried, but Marx got Hegel upside down. But that's why world spirit started trying to come through him, but got corrupted. So now postmodernism is at its completion. The negative moment is ready to negate itself. And this is what metamodernism is trying to do. That's why it's one of the closest modes to the return to the Hegelian principle. But they're doing it in an abstract sense because they don't understand Hegel. They haven't done their homework. So we're going to come with New World Spirit, and we're going to complete that work in this New World Clarity. And we're going to ensure that this historical moment in time where the negation is completing itself takes the positive universal moment of logic that we sublate, because Hegel says that in contingent reality, in our created universe, we do not have to follow the perfect logic. In the science of logic, in the perfect supersensuous realm, where the logic is in itself, developing itself, it is perfectly sublating its negations every time. But in our universe, we have two potential results. We can actually perform the universal logic and sublate, but there's a second option that's quite scary, which is that we don't have to have that happen. We could actually completely cancel ourselves in nullity, is what he calls it, where the dialectic stops. And this seems to be where we're approaching if we can't teach an AI, those who have CRISPR, the world wars, all of these types of existential threats are signs that the negation has almost too much momentum, and we need a cultural competence, a cultural technology that has just as much power and inertia to match it, and can rise up exponentially fast because the mega crisis is exponentially increasing. And the only knowledge that is non-linear like that is the universal logic from Hegel in that level of clarity, because we don't have time for conflation. We have to get to that level, which is why the meta mode is also important and not just the content. So that's why I'm trying to introduce it as fast as possible in all these modes and find the hardcores and the gifted implicit UQ individuals like yourself that can ask the right questions and start getting into this and do what took me 4,000 hours, do this in about 12 to 100 hours is what we're finding we can teach it in, and get aligned with that, get on some hunger strikes, show trust and integrity by limiting our sensuous corruptions. A lot of people think, oh, the hunger strikes don't work, they're not politically useful. It actually has a second mode. It sends a signal to ordinary consciousness that's sensuous, right? To say that we can control our particular carnal desires, rise to the universal in ourselves, which is eudaimonia to Aristotle, Hegel says, and we can hold our carnal desires in check and only utilize them when wise, right? And so we're sending a signal that we can be trusted, because trust is the thing that the meta crisis is losing, right? And so if I go a month without eating, and I'm on day 26, I'm like so happy. I'm so happy I'm almost done. I can't wait to eat some vegan food. Oh my goodness. We're sending a signal to say, if we can go that long without our carnal impulse of eating, then you probably can't corrupt us with money, power, sex, any of these sensuous categories. And so this is why I feel like the hunger strikes can speed up this consideration by taking on the pain, the ridicule. I get tons of Snapchats made about me here at the university. There's like 30,000 kids that know about me now, but it takes roughly 7 negations to get into a genuine sublation in terms of like accidental consciousness when they don't know how to do it consciously. It takes about 7 rounds of negation, and the hunger strikes invite in the negation because it makes us look crazy, but it's really accelerating the dialectical moment so we can keep pace with how fast the mega crisis is falling out of control. And now we are finally getting the core to form. We're getting the core team here. We got 20 students. People are starting to realize that, unfortunately, the meta-modern community fell into the negative dialectic. They felt threatened by me, unfortunately, because, it's really quite incredible to have absolute certainty. It makes you very, very confident. And I'm trying not to be hubristic too much. I'm trying to come off as assertive to say we have a deadline here and we have to stop fooling around. And so hopefully these incredible guys like Daniel Smachtenberger, John Vervaeke, these heavyweights of the meaning crisis can get on board, and we can start teaching them, because they have amazing networks of pure hearts. Their spiritual gravity is incredible. I think once they get on board, we're going to have a critical mass that we can protect, because the marketing strategy is not based on abstract marketing, which will hit these nuclear dialectics as the demographics grow and then abstract away huge sections of people. Our movement in New World Spirit creates belonging as we grow, because we're sublating all those dialectical moments in higher levels of identity. And that's the beauty of, I think, embracing all these opposites, and I would say making sure that everybody feels relevant. Like you said, who's relevant now? Well, in the end, nobody gets left behind as long as you find their moment of ideality where they belong to the whole and they enter their flow state because they're fulfilling their destiny sensuously and super sensuously.
Where are you now, and why is that the right place at the right time?
Where I am now is in eternal time, which is the present, because I understand the universal, which generates itself from pure being. In terms of sensuous time and sensuous place, I am at the University of Alberta here in Canada. I chose the University of Alberta as a strategic epicenter because, first of all, I am a student here. My hometown is only 3 hours away, so it was like the default university I came to. I didn't know it was a world-class university, but the oil here caused the oil companies to make it into a world-class university by pumping billions of dollars into engineering. And of course, they had to have cultural programs to make the indigenous happy. So we have a bit of social justice here. And what I realized is kind of a godsend that I was born in this place in time, because Canada, of course, is known as peacekeeping, which is very sublative, even though they don't know the universal logic of it. And that Alberta is sort of like the Texas of Canada. It's the most conservative part. So if we can sublate here, we can sublate anywhere. And universities are traditionally more liberal. So we have this the opposites happening here that are priming for the universal. So it's kind of like this incredible fusion generator of speculative thought in a powerful enough way in terms of contingent power, in terms of the power structure of the sort of hyper-credentialization and sensuousness that we have. The UA is large enough that it will have a global impact, but it's small enough that it's not an Ivy League. Because when you're an Ivy League, you have these really big global players that have billions of dollars that can stop your influence. So I can influence this university just enough to have it restructure, and that we have all the departments here. We have a very diverse set of faculty, so that Hegel's encyclopedia can be embodied as a whole. All the trinities can start being placed here. And we have very, very powerful sensuous faculties, medicine and engineering, for example, that can pull in money that we can transmute into this new spirit economy, this new flow economy that becomes more human-centric and starts to be pay people based on flow state and not on hyper production, or what we call absolute production, which is causing the mental health crisis, anxiety, depression. We're not in flow. We are trying to keep up with an infinite production process that's going to go to the singularity with the AI, and we will burn out. And that's what's happening. So we need to transmute all this sensuous money, all this sensuous resources into this new kind of wakefulness and measure based on flow. And so this university is perfect for that, because we can get a huge amount of funding, because two of the mega crises are in medicine and in engineering. And we have a world-class virology genetic lab here from Li Ka-shing, who has millions of dollars. And we have a Nobel Prize winner laureate here. So if we can get them on board, we can start a CRISPR citizen lab under this new world spirit ethics, where we give the cures and we race all these corporate labs to these patents on the cures, to then inspire the populace, those people who have diseases like diabetes, whatever it is, to invest in our lab, because we're going to give them the cures in a human-centric way because we love them. We're going to cure them because they're literally just the notion in sensuous form. They are humans, rather than profiteering commodity or commodities to be profiteered off of, or objects. So this is why the university is a great place to start in medicine, but also in engineering. We have a great computer engineering faculty or department too, where AI is receiving incredible amounts of funding to try and solve this regulation problem before it's too late. And like we have 6 months. So we have a lot of computer science students that are coming up to my hunger strike and saying, I'm worried. You're right. This is out of control. The world wars are causing it so we can't overregulate the AIs, because whoever has the strongest AI will win the war. So we're forced to develop this thing. We have no idea how it works. And it's doing random things that could really harm us. And so they're actually coming to me like, yeah, how do we get going? And we have like one of the main engineers at chess.com also very interested in this. I think you know him actually. And he's trying to contact Silicon Valley, where if we get the right teams together, and we're calling them wisdom teams, we could do something exponential. We could basically make decades of progress in weeks. But it comes down to the sense making. It comes down to the culture, because culture eats strategy for breakfast. And guess what our New World Spirit culture is based on? It's predicated on universal logic, the ultimate self-determining coherence, which is not culty because it's not external to you. You can learn it as a science and be critical of it, not destroy it, but actually purify it and refine it. So this is the culture that's going to take our research symposium here at the university and turn it into 64 wisdom teams that are going to be the new governmental system, the new institutions, the new living institutions of wisdom. So we can tackle all these problems under the same wakefulness and this emergent organism. So that's why the university is kind of a perfect place, is we have a strong arts faculty, or we did, it's dying now. But it's strong enough that we can put philosophy back on top of the university with their influence, and then run all these particular technical research projects to show that wisdom permeates them all. And as long as we use them in this wakefulness that creates an eternal kind of ethics in our general intelligence as a cultured team, but also in terms of artificial intelligences as well. And there's there's other ones too, right? Like we got one for the wars. We have a great political science faculty here. And we have a guy in Sri Lanka who's actually one of the world's top security experts in South Asia, who's going to help me publish the universal logic as a premier security technology with these special meetings we're calling ever-living meetings to start peace negotiations with this universal diplomacy that can transcend all of these nuclear dialectics that come into a conversation. And then we have, of course, climate change. We have a strong climate change movement here because of the oil, and indigenous movement too, where universal logic actually supports and actually proves or translates indigenous wisdom into a scientific form so that our modern epoch can understand it. And then number five, the fifth crisis, mental health, is that this sort of relationship building that we're doing through the universal logic as this recognition process is an intimacy building. And this is all this like erotic stuff that like Mark Gaffney and all these guys, I guess, romantic. I don't know. A lot of people tell me to go talk to these guys, but they're just doing it in the artistic mode. We need to do it in all five meta modes in a respectful way. But we turn this external connecting through social media into internal connecting. And that internal connecting comes through the right way of communicating. And we're perfecting that now. So the University of Alberta is an incredible epicenter, a great point to get basically 30,000 undergraduates and a 5,000 person faculty that have world connections to all the Ivy Leagues to influence 15,000 universities to repeat this paradigm shift we're about to do, and to start teaching Hegel a lot more powerfully, have wisdom run the universities of the world, and then help us create the universal university, which will be the global university, of which all ideas are put into this global fund that then shares the value generated by the discovery, that divine process of idea generation, into a universal basic dividend, not an income. An income is dead. A universal basic dividend is tied to production, which is the living movement of the organism when it is in this wakefulness of true spirit. And so that's how we're going to start recoordinating all of society in these universal upgradings as the qualitative nature emerges through our spiritual discovery of ourselves as a return to the supersensuous universal logic. So that's why the university is, I think, a great place of contradiction to sublate all these nuclear dialectics and show the world as a beacon that we can and will win 6 Nobel Prizes with one powerful knowledge, which will validate and accreditate spiritual wisdom on a global level, which will have people adopt it in record time. Even at the top universities that think abstract science is the true knowledge, we're going to replace profiteering and replace that abstract knowledge with the concrete knowledge of this genuine care, this genuine blessedness, where our species unites again in basically what some would call, well, in art, we would call it the inspired state. In religion, we'd call it kingdom come. In science, we would call it the infinite science of coherent truth. And in terms of philosophy, we would call it the wise goodness of eternal blessedness. That's kind of what we're trying to start here at the U of A, and the hunger strike is basically doing 2 years of activism in like a few months. And then we're going to start holding town halls because we have a student group now, and we can book classrooms, and we're going to start advertising. And then after the summer, there's a recruitment fair where I'm going to try and recruit about, in the past, I was able to recruit 300 to 500 people to make poverty history. So I'm pretty sure we can do that for New World Spirit. And then we'll be one of the largest groups on campus. And then the critical mass will take off even further. And that my lawsuit against the university, where they tried to stop this, my lawsuit is a philosophical tool to force the oppressors or this abstract consciousness to respect my human rights, so that I can get this message into the memetics, into the culture, when we're rushing history a little bit. So if they decide to mediate, which it looks like they're going to, then I'll drop the lawsuit. They'll support the consortium. We'll start to get this prejudice against Hegel out of the institution and have this incredible sense-making happen, where I think as soon as we get to 1 or 2 professors endorsing this, the whole thing will take off like rapid fire, because it is absolutely peaceful. It is a peace of mind. It just makes sense. And that's what we're trying to do, is find those first professors to support the 20 students that we have, and then start these labs, and then get all these other connections around the world vouching for this, because that's kind of what spirit is. It is the power of the word spreading in this truthful nature. So that's kind of what I'm doing here at the U of A right now, laying on the ground under this tarp where thousands of students per day walk by me and see me. And whether or not they talk to me, they're seeing the sign, and people are starting websites and stuff, and being interviewed, and it is working, but we need to go faster. And maybe you guys, because your work is basically doing the same thing, can also start to supercharge this under what we're calling the spirit license, where your goodness, your spirit, your talents, sensuously and supersensuously, are going to be sublated, and we share in this new reciprocity in this wakefulness of the notion. So how Hegel qualitatively defines quantity in mathematics is all also in these dualities. When you see mathematics in this wonderfully simple way, that's all that economics is. It's kind of like barter trade, but now we do it in a reciprocal, proportional way that we can measure in a much higher efficacy. And then this creates trust because you're not being left behind. So this is where if you lend your talent and your skills, even on the economic level, we've sublated that too. The dead economy is gone. We have this flowing economy where you can trust me and the other leaders to actually bring you into coherence without leaving you behind or exploiting you in this dead, utilitarian, exploitive, extractive way that our current abstract global capitalism is doing. Not that capitalism is bad, it is a moment, but we need to make it wise by sublating its limit with socialism and communism, and then allowing this individual freedom to shine as the divine idea, but share it in this wakefulness that allows everybody to move in coherence again.
Thank you, Spirit Man, for your time.
That's enough. We've only gone for an hour and a half. There's 7 more hours to go.
Is there one last sentence that you would like to gift to the archive?
Yeah, the sentence that we use is, a miracle is happening and we all are the spark.
A fine sentence indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really, really fascinating interview, and I commend the work and the play that you're doing over there.
Well, I commend the work. I've been learning a bit about you guys too. And Victor really wants me to connect with you and get our projects working together. So if the archive is your main project, if you look at the synchronicity document, if there's some way to merge them where it feels like you guys feel respected, then that's the spirit license too. I'd like to actually, did I send that to you?
You haven't yet, but I think more relevant is the World Wise Web, and I'll send you some information about that. And that's the technological substrate that we're working on, and that's where I see the greatest synergy.
Okay, so on that note, he did mention that. They said, well, why don't we merge these ELMs on the WICO website? And I said, that'd be a great idea. But the thing is, when I analyze your guys' spirit, because I invite in radical honesty, it's the only way to sublate. So we need to pass the wisdom quiz. And so if we lend all this power to you guys, we don't want you to accidentally corrupt it through that ignorance of the dialectic.
Mm-hmm.
And what I saw in terms of your understanding of sublation is you guys don't quite know how to sublate yet, but you do understand the trinities a little bit in your mapping, which is fantastic. I love the mapping stuff. But when it comes to the reciprocity and the sharing, there's some abstractions that are concerning me a bit. So what I want to do is get a little bit further and sign the spirit license so that when we come onto your platform, you're not going to leave us behind by accident in fear-based dialectics, which always happens. As you get raised into power, you get put into the logic gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and more charged, more and more nuclear, and you get eventually put into traps called double binds.
Mm-hmm.
And double binds are the real scary thing because you can't get out of them with meta conversation. You can only get out of them with like a universal culture of meta that then creates love. So like that's where we're going, and that's what killed Jesus and Buddha's family and all that kind of stuff. That's where we're going if we're going to change the world, which is where we're going. And so if we use your technology and we supercharge you, then you have to make sure that that's not going to happen. And for me, that's the wisdom quiz. And there's a certain way that people interact in terms of the vow of unabandonment. So if you take the vow of unabandonment and can divine that clearly, know the essence, and have a history of embodying that, I will be under your leadership no time. But if you can't do that, then be under my leadership, because I've taken that for you and I've demonstrated it. I can be trusted not to be corrupted. I will come back for you, no matter how much money, no matter how much sex, no matter how much beauty, no matter how much any privileges. I will come back for you. That's my strength. That's my gift here on earth. Even if I'm confused, because the vow allows me to keep sublating, I will go in circles if I made a mistake until I learn the lesson and I sublate. And I can do that. So if I'm going to get under somebody else's leadership or technology, I need to see that it won't get corrupted as we imbue you with literally the strongest, most powerful movement the world has ever seen. And I have done my homework. I am not as naive as this hunger strike looks laying on the ground. This is tens of thousands of hours of political negotiating with the head of threat detection here at the university. It's like a lot of curating in terms of the marketing to make sure it's love-based, not cult-based, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot more than meets the eye here. And I need to see that from you guys. And so far, I see a lot of sensuous privilege masquerading as universal logic. But I sense pure hearts. That's where Victor and I agree. I sense that you guys are actually supposed to be a part of this and are supposed to be leaders in this. But you got to take me seriously, and we got to get moving quickly. When I say take me seriously, that doesn't mean obey or worship or don't. If you do that, you will corrupt me. That's why, like, absolute corruption can happen the other way too. Not just me being ignorant onto you, but it could happen from your ignorance onto me, and people will turn you into a cult leader. So we need to come at that anti-cult training in two ways, which I learned very quickly in my previous organizations. So even that is built in. So when I say you need to take me seriously, what I mean is critical thinking. You just need to keep grilling me until it makes sense to you, and it will. It's happened with 2 world-class leaders already. But you just got to give me a little bit of time, and then you're going to get on board with this consortium, and we're going to supercharge your platform with 30,000 students here potentially. And all this power is going to really leverage what you guys are doing and make it recognized really, really, really quickly. But I need the spirit license to be understood. I need the vow of unabandonment, and we got to get the wisdom quiz passed. So those are the kind of 3 criterion of leadership, so that your UQ gets a little bit higher. Because I don't feel like it's quite reciprocal yet. This interview is really reciprocating the work that I put into reading your 50-page document. So I really appreciate that. That's what's really given me a lot of confidence and trust in you. Even though I've taken the vow of unabandonment for you already, I'll never abandon you. So it doesn't really matter. But in terms of like making progress together, this really, I think, was a very practical, pragmatic move. And I appreciate letting me sort of download with such excellent questions, personal questions too. Hopefully we can do that to you as well in some reciprocal way. Yeah. And let me know what that is. Okay. So, and also let me know what the next steps are, even if it's tonight. Like we're literally going, I'm out here day by day suffering because we got to stop thinking in months and years. We need to start thinking in days and weeks. That's the rate we're working at. Twice a day, we're having ever living meetings. Jump in there. Let's get the glass speed game supercharged. Let's go. But of course, if you don't like it, be radically, radically honest, because I'm very thick-skinned and I love that kind of thing. So, okay, I feel like you have other things to do. Let me know what you think of that, and I feel blessed, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Send me links to those 3 things, and I'll check them out.
I'll do that right now.
Okay,
Lawrence. Okay. Stay peaceful.
Godspeed, spirit man. Peace.
Yes, Godspeed.